Okay, so I'm Diane Strutner. I'm the CEO of Datazoom, and this is the panel on the state of data in video here at Streaming Media East. So at a high level, across the board, any industry you go to, everybody is struggling with data. And they're specifically struggling with creating clean, relevant, and labeled data sets to be able to use for newer technologies like AI and machine learning, and to have a better understanding of their business and where they need to go in the next few years. And the video space is no different. Today's industry, we all suffer from not having standardized, centralized, and organized data sets. It's very difficult today to make decisions with the data we have. It's stuck in silos, there's subjectivity added into it, it's not in real time, and all this leads to not being able to make the strategic improvements that video publishers and all of the vendors and infrastructure providers that support them need to make the business of video better. So what data do we have today, and how good is it? Let's first define what good data is. Data quality is measured by both accuracy and precision. So we can see here a few examples of, we have completely inaccurate and precise data, we have precise data but it's inaccurate, but it is, imprecise but it is accurate, and then the holy grail of having both precise and accurate data. And how do we actually define accuracy and precision? So today these are really defined by what calculations that we're using today and how we're actually measuring the data in the first place. Singular data points and measurements actually don't tell the whole story for us. So a lot of us here come from different parts of the video streaming space. We might come from video playback, video delivery, video preparation, even the creation of content. And we actually are all part of this end-to-end value chain. So by looking at information just from one part of this end-to-end process, we're not going to better understand the impact across all of these systems. To understand data points really means understanding data in context, which means bringing together data from across all of these different parts of the playback, delivery, preparation, and creation of content today. So what we really want to talk about is, the future of data really looks like an end-to-end data texture, where we have data that's coming from video playback. It's pulled in from the process of delivering this video, the creation of all of this content, and it involves making core changes to how we're aggregating data, transforming, standardizing, joining, routing data to share with other industries. And we should be using data at least, to send feedback loops of information and reports to a lot of different types of tools today. So data warehouses, our delivery partners, our advertising partners, our content creation partners. So with this in mind, I would like to introduce today's panel. And actually, I'm going to have the panel introduce themselves, so if you want to start.
Sure.
Cool.
Hi, my name is Joshua Kinberg. I'm a Director of Product Management at NBC News Digital. I manage all of our apps and video across all of our experiences for NBC News, Today Show, and MSNBC.
Hi, I'm Iddo Shai. I'm Director of Product at Kaltura. Kaltura is a white label OTT solution for media companies and telcos that want to manage all their video assets, their users, as well as their business offerings in a single platform. And I manage the UI that allows them to do everything that I just said.
Yeah, and I'm Rob Colantuoni. I'm a principal architect in the Advanced Services Group at Limelight Networks. I work with all of our high-value customers to deliver content globally over our global CDN.
Awesome. So you guys are all in different parts of this industry. I'd like to know, what types of data do you have today? What are the sources of this data? And what have your organizations found most valuable in capturing and monitoring today?
Sure. So you had a slide up earlier that kind of showed some of the different data sources, but there are data sources in the sort of production of an asset and encoding of an asset and creation of a packaging of an asset. There's data at the player level of streaming an asset. Did a consumer view the asset? Was the ad stitched in properly? How did that align with other user experience data on the front end of an app or a website? So a lot of data is being generated. from different disparate sources. And I think one of the challenges that you've laid out is joining it in a way that actually gives us intelligence into what's happening to help us either troubleshoot problems or make our user experience or customer experience better for people watching videos and viewing our content and viewing advertisements.
Yeah, I mean, for us, so Kaltura started very focused on player technology, so quality of experience, understanding buffer time and join time, and average repeat rate has always been very important for us. But in recent years, I think very much like the industry has evolved, we started looking more at user data and understanding how we can connect these dots. So if a user had a bad session, right, he had a lot of buffering, maybe that also correlates to the fact that he hasn't logged into the service in a long time. So he might be a churn risk for an OTT service. So we try to connect these and highlight them for our customers so they can take actions.
Yeah, and then from the CDN side, I mean, we see things from the distribution end of it, right? And what's interesting about the way the current metric market is that we may have access to front-end metrics via existing, RUM metric measurement sources, but oftentimes our tie values there, the things that allow us to see, what that session looked like from the aspect of the edge and from the origin. It's simply like IP address and time, and so we don't have a cohesive way of following a user's experience from the edge through the CDN and all the way back to the origin. And so it's interesting, because the panel, we have 3 distinct members and different layers and separations and concerns, and that's I think to the point, we don't have a cohesive metric consolidation system.
So, question. So, as an example, if you, Josh, see a quality issue that's taking place during video playback today, what kind of tools are you using, and when are you indicated, and what types of actions are you taking out of some of these systems that you're leveraging today?
It's a challenging space. I would say, one thing about streaming video over the internet is things will fail. And so hopefully you can recover quickly and identify where that failure is, but it's like inevitable that things are going to fail for someone somewhere. And there are many different parts of the stack that you have to trace through to figure out, well, why did it fail, or where did it fail, or who's it failing for, on what device, and what browser, and what player, what advertisement, and where was the failure? Is it the streaming, the CDN layer? Is it the encoding layer? Is it the package? So there's all these different things in different systems that may be responsible for, that are orchestrated together to deliver a user experience. And when something goes awry, or somebody important in the company calls us and says, hey, this video isn't working on this device, it can be very, very hard to trace back what's causing the issue. Maybe it's a networking issue for that one particular person on that one particular device. So all of that, telemetry into that problem is a challenge and is very hard. And I would say, we manage it inconsistently and not 100% perfect right now.
So today, would you say it's accurate that you basically are using a lot of different distinct tools and different dashboards and
Absolutely, yeah.
doing manual correlation of some of these systems today?
Absolutely. It's very hard to troubleshoot these things in real time if there was a problem happening. Now, if there was a major problem happening during a very important streaming event, we'd have a lot of people trying to figure that out in real time. If it's something like, hey, one particular VOD asset, the 3-minute clip is failing for someone somewhere, we may not get alerted about that right away or have people acting on it right away. If there's, let's say there's an important congressional hearing testimony that might happen soon, and it's pretty important that we stream that because it's a high-value news event, yeah, we're going to have people dedicated to troubleshooting that in real time.
And so let's say that you have a set of tools, and let's say you get lucky, you come to the source of this problem really fast. I know it could be a challenge, let's say, with the CDN to bring in our friend over there at the end of the table. What is your method of communicating some of these challenges with some of the vendors that you work with, like your CDN vendor?
So, I mean, we have different solutions for different things, and some of the player technology we use is able to, for a live streaming event, is able to automatically switch CDNs, and we're able to use multiple CDN providers. And if there's a failure in one particular CDN or from a particular edge node, there's automation to kind of switch CDNs. And we don't have that for all of our streaming players, but some of our streaming players have that. So I guess we have inconsistent technologies and inconsistent solutions depending on the type of content or the type of player technology, or whether it's consistently deployed across all of our devices and players across all platforms. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're able to deal with it better times than others.
Are you able, do you feel, well, actually, Rob, do you feel like we're able to, do you feel like customers are able to provide you with the right information that you need in case there's an issue to troubleshoot some of these challenges that they may be facing?
It depends. It depends. Again, to the standardization point, we have many customers and vastly different RUM measurement metric solutions. Like I have some customers who went out and acqui-hired in their own RUM metrics company, right? And then they brought that company in, and that is a sole source of metrics, right? Now, how are they measuring a particular metric? Like, how are they measuring video start failures or rebuffers versus one of the other commercial vendors? I don't know. So we're looking at data on a per customer basis, and we're measuring it relative to how the customer's performing when we know things are good. But we have no way of essentially standardizing across customers and aggregating for things like device type or delivery protocol or regional ASN, DMA, those sorts of things, because they're using all these different tools and platforms which may or may not be measuring things in the same exact way, right?
And what would you be able to do differently today that you can't do if you had access to some standardization of data about the types of devices and the metrics, the key metrics that you guys rely on? Like, do you think that the state of your business could change a lot if you had access to this type of information?
Yeah, absolutely. So having a standard, upon the base of standard data, you build up things like AI, and like we already have things like automated traffic engineering and automated processes within our system that respond to known good data sources, right? We don't have a lot of that on base that we run on top of edge data, because we can't necessarily rely or pull that data in and expect that it's going to be the same from vendor to vendor and across the board, right? So if I know that a video start failure, or if I know that a rebuffer is the same across all of the data, then I can start making automated decisions and engineering responses in response to that.
Do you do any type of this automation off of, let's say, external data sources today that you're aware of?
No, I don't think we necessarily trust them enough. I mean, so we like, for example, when we're doing our live event monitoring, we're utilizing various metrics that are coming in from various sources, and those types of responses are typically manual because they're very high stakes, and we don't want to have any sort of like automation failures or that sort of thing. But most of the metrics that we rely on to do automated AI type of engineering decisions or automated decisions come from collectors within the organization that we control and that we standardize on.
Got it.
Yeah.
So, what happens when we see systems that are in conflict? So inevitably, if we are looking at different data that's then being calculated in different ways, and we have different access to different data sets, there must often be some conflict between some of the data sources that we get today. How have you guys approached resolution of some of these conflicting data sets, and what are the outcomes? Do you determine that like some data is better and more valuable than others? Is it kind of a wash? Did we determine that we just don't have any good data? What are the outcomes of some of these conflicting sources of information?
I mean, if there's a conflicting data of enough scale, we go in and we try and troubleshoot it. We try and figure out why are we seeing discrepancies between this reporting and that reporting when they should be, closely aligned. But yeah, it's just a challenge. I don't think we have a one-size-fits-all solution. We have to go in and troubleshoot that individual implementation. And because we have multiple platforms, multiple players, unique integrations of data solutions across each of those, and a lot of duplication of work to integrate different third-party integrations into our different players and platforms, there's inevitably going to be some sort of, why are we seeing a discrepancy in data here versus data there? And then, we have to figure out the problem. But I wouldn't say, it's just manual labor right now, trying to figure it out.
And I think there's measurement limitations too, right? So some of the data that I collect, like on my CDN, like a solid example is like duration, right? So my edge node knows that it delivers a certain number of bytes in a certain duration, right? But when I measure duration, I only have, my limitation is that I measure the end of my delivery at the point at which I push that packet out my network interface. It does not include the transit of that packet to the end user, right? And so, and when you're looking at run metric data, that duration may vary depending on what that downstream link looked like, right? So if there's a way for, and not that my data is not useful, my data is very useful because it contains other information about, my internal network and how those bytes were delivered. But if the customer is seeing something like, well, my duration times are, taking 2.5 seconds to deliver this file, but I'm seeing a 1.5 second duration, well, there's this major discrepancy there. And how do I join those together in a way where it makes sense, where I can tell the story? Because, that's what we're trying to do with metrics. We're trying to tell a story and build a mental model of what's happening in the delivery, where this all makes sense and we can fix the problem.
Yeah, you have to have some source of truth or some data that's, as you alluded to, some data that's more trustworthy than others, or some set of data that correlates, so you can say, oh, well, this is the outlier.
Yeah.
And it may come from various sources, from CDN, or maybe you might say, hey, this, what we're seeing in the CDN is inaccurate compared to what we see over here. So, you have to be able to compare and see where the outliers are and see which data do you have more confidence in, do you trust more than, where you might be seeing a discrepancy.
Yeah.
I think from an interesting question I always had was, Datazoom, we have the insight to see just how much variance there is on just from the playback data side to start with, right?
Mm-hmm.
And every single player framework will expose different data points. We'll have different limitations of the data points, different sets of data points. So I have a question for you. When you're up against other types of player technologies and you have customers who are bringing you these types of metrics that are inevitably looking at data in a different way, how do you solve that? Like, as a quick example, not all players will expose a buffer event, but pretty much every analytic solution out there will have some sort of metric for buffering, independent of the player.
Yeah.
So obviously, we're not using the same data to approach that. So if are customers evaluating you on these types of metrics, and if so, how are you handling that?
Yeah, they definitely are. Our toughest conversations with our customers that use our player is why is this player loading 0.3 seconds before you guys, and like what's going on? And then there could be so many things that happening in the background that could impact that. It's not necessarily the way that the player has been coded. And this happens, of course, after they chose us, and maybe they have like an important event and something happens and the player doesn't load fast enough, or maybe there's buffering, and there could be issues in many places that could impact that. And it's kind of funny that I'm sandwiched between both of you here, because it could be an issue with the application, could be an issue with the CDN, could be an issue with the player. So the way that we do it is usually we have our own tracking mechanism that allows us to see obviously all of the events that we track, and then we would use 1 or 2 external vendors that we kind of check ourselves against them, and we also arm our support people to look into that if there are issues. And so based on all that data, we try to make sure that we're doing okay, or see if we can improve.
So I guess you brought up a great point here. If there's an issue, it could be many different, challenges on the table, even just individual stakeholders here on this panel.
Yeah.
So my question would be, from all of you, how are you guys sharing data between your entities to try and come to faster diagnostics on why issues are appearing and what the root cause of that issue is, and how are you guys approaching data sharing today? I know that in general, I think there's been some challenges with the concept of data sharing because a lot of companies will view their data as their strategic advantage, and in many ways, certain types of data certainly is a strategic advantage. So it's not like you would want to share potentially all of who's watching what title with all of your competitors, right? That's something that you wouldn't want to share. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, there probably is some data internally, more operational type data that should be shared. And are you looking at mechanisms for sharing this, or do you have any roadmap plans for vendors on this panel here to actually begin trying to share and surface and expose more data with other stakeholders?
Yeah, so we make all of our raw logs available for customers, and what they'll do is they'll go ahead and ingest that. Now, of course, on top of that, we layer in various aggregator reports that are available, download, and they can integrate using an API with our data. But what's interesting is that we are exposed to the certain other levels of the delivery experience via third-party platform, whatever they decide to measure. For example, their player metrics or their run metrics. So for each of my customers, I have a different platform that I have to log in, export the data, and then again, like I mentioned earlier, the way that we tie that data together isn't necessarily clear, right? So we may have different. I may have to, we may have to log munge and pull the data in from the CDN side to merge it with what we're seeing in the various other platforms. So it's not a straightforward drop-in type of thing. Wish it was, but and vice versa. We have customers who go ahead and do the same thing on their side. So instead of myself bringing in the run metrics and trying to merge it with my logs and trying to make a cohesive decision based on that, they'll do the same. They'll ingest the raw logs into their own data store and do some sort of aggregation and filtering, and then spit out a result. But none of it is drop in place, and it is very bespoke and artisanal. That's what we like to say in the business.
Very nice. I want to change the topic to narrowing on a subject area that I think this industry has been struggling with, which is the area of advertising. And I think, as we all know, one of the big challenges that we face as an industry is we've not really done a good job at translating the revenue that we get from linear distribution into online distribution. And I was sitting in a panel earlier on advertising, and we had, it was Nielsen and Roku and Adobe and Freewheel all on this panel, and they were all talking about the complexities of how do we manage all of these different properties, and how do we manage the campaigns and frequency capping and all of that stuff. So I'm interested, Josh, from your perspective, what are some of the unique opportunities for data to play a better role in the success of getting higher CPMs and more satisfaction and with advertising, and also attribution that could exist today, and also what are some of the challenges that you face with all the different ways in which you distribute content and the different technology stacks that you're using that you're trying to work on?
Yeah, so as mentioned before, we have many different platforms, many different players depending on the content, and making sure that people have a good experience across those and also a good ad experience. I'm always trying to balance, our ability to earn revenue by delivering advertising and our ability to have a good user experience. And sometimes those two things are in conflict.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of our ads are delivered via programmatic. So we may not know which ad is being delivered or joined with the content in any given case. Sometimes on the web, we may encounter ad blocking, and there's a certain amount of revenue loss due to ad blockers, and how do we react to either get around the ad blocker or recognize that a user is using an ad blocker and encourage them to whitelist our site, because good journalism costs money, and advertising is one way that we enable our great journalism. So there's various different cases that might come up. And one thing that I always look at, kind of how would we balance the user experience, is are we displaying the right ads to the user? Are the ads being well targeted to that user? Are they relevant to that user? Other competitors, let's say Google platforms or Facebook platforms or other competitors, may have other ways of better matching the advertising to the user's intent or the user's interests. And we may not be using all of the same personalization capabilities that they might be using. Or we might be trying to monetize content with advertising from television that might be, let's say, a 30-second ad, and a user could get that content on YouTube without an ad or with a 6-second ad or with a skippable ad. And maybe that's a better user experience because they're able to play the content faster or have a better advertising experience. So, these things are always kind of in conflict. It's like, are we monetizing our content effectively, and how are we balancing it with the user experience? And then on top of that, I think another data point that we're missing is, are we impacting loyalty? Are we impacting the ability is the user abandoning, or is the user abandoning and not coming back to watch content on our sites or in our apps because of the ad experience? So those things are always in, kind of in tension and in conflict, and are things that, we're always looking for better data solutions to help us answer these questions.
You brought up a word that I like, which is reaction. And essentially the idea that, something happens and we want to act on it right away. And I'm curious from your perspective, what are some of the low-hanging areas of automated processes that could be put into place if we had data in a better state, a more consistent, standardized, normalized state in the industry? This can be anything, but do you see areas for advertising to improve where you would say, hey, if this happens, I always want to be able to respond with a certain type of change?
Let's take the experience of ad blocking as an example. If we can recognize that there's an ad blocker in place that could be impacting the user experience, causing, the ad blocker is preventing an ad call, and it looks like the player's just spinning as it's waiting for an ad call to return, and then it times out, and then, maybe the content plays, or maybe there's a failure. But it's because of an ad blocker interrupting the experience. That's happening outside of the player. So we need some way to recognize that's impacting the experience and respond to that. We can respond to that by prompting a message to that user, if we can recognize the ad blocker and telling them, please whitelist us. We can respond to that potentially by changing our ad technology. Instead of trying to deliver ads that are being blocked by the ad blocker, trying to deliver ads that don't get blocked by the ad blocker, either through server-side stitching of ads or other ways. So I think we're always reacting, to use the word, we're always trying to analyze what's happening in the market or what's happening in the user experience, what's causing the problem, how do we get data to understand the issue or the severity of the issue, and then implement some type of response to that, either to recover the revenue or to improve the user experience or to do whatever we can. But yeah, it's an evolving space as ad blockers change, and things are always a moving target.
Got it.
Yeah. For us, if I go back to your previous question about the challenges around data, we are in an interesting place, Kaltura is, because we, in OTT, users are always authenticated, unlike in traditional linear TV when people would just turn in. So we actually can, we know exactly who the user is, and we know everything about their viewing habits, which is important data that we're able to store in our logs. But for a very long time, we haven't done anything with that data, and we don't really have an easy way to even transfer it to the ad server. And all their targeting is usually based on the metadata that they get about the video or the program that the person is watching, and maybe a little bit about the demographics based on what they already know specifically for that user. But there's so much more that we can potentially give them, but there's no easy way to do it today in the industry. So we are working with some partners to understand how we can better use that, and also after the user has been exposed to a certain ad, like you said, attribution could be a very strong feature for OTT, because you can literally track the user and see if he actually went into a car dealership or Target and bought the diapers that they saw the ad for. So these types of advertisers, wildest dreams, are now technically possible, but it's we do have a few hurdles to get through in order to actually make it a reality.
Yeah, so it's interesting because we don't really deal with advertising as much. I mean, we do ads, server-side ad insertion, those sorts of things. But when I hear about tailoring the advertisements to the individual users, and like you said, they're always logged in. You know kind of where they are regionally. I can't help but think like how useful that data would be in closing the loop with the CDN providers, right? So if you look at somebody who has like the entire ecosystem below them, right? Netflix. You look at Netflix. These guys, they've got the player, they've got the CDN, they've got all of the data. They own everything. And so if you look at what they're doing, one of the things they do is they will intentionally push content out into regions where they know that people who have preferences for that content are going to be watching it, right? So they start to feed the data about what are people watching, where are they watching it, and they start to feed that back into the loop. Now they can do everything because they own the entire ecosystem there, right? They're Netflix, they own all of the pieces. We all come from disparate parts of a partnership that none of that data is exposed in whole to all of us, right? So I'm not an advertiser, but if I had the information about what content was going to be most popular in the New York City area, for example, on NBC Sports, I could utilize that data to pre-cache VOD content that I know is going to be being watched at a particular point in time, at a particular at peak, and those sorts of things. So it comes back and helps with the overall quality of the delivery experience.
Yeah, it's something I've particularly found interesting, which is that, the CDN is kind of a middleman in many ways of the full end-to-end process. Yeah. And the CDN, just like every other service, makes a number of critical decisions about how to balance traffic within their network, what the next steps, the next egress pathway would be. And I always find it fascinating that for a long time, you guys, I don't know how you've done a really good job at delivering content without this perspective of the end user experience. Do you have any initiatives or interests in?
Well, I mean, so we do. So that's because things are naturally going to live in cache if they're popular, right? But now what's interesting is that we're moving away from or moving into a situation where many of our customers are going to have what we consider long tail content, large libraries where people are watching one or two assets out of that library at any particular point in time, right? And so then the nature of things organically being cached in certain regions the benefits of that start to go away a little bit. And so that's where the data comes into play is we can start to look at, well, what is in the long tail contents typically 80% of the content's going to be watched over a certain period of time, but it's not 20% of the top 80% of content is going to be watched. And so you can't necessarily predict that somebody, on Long Island is going to be watching, Ferris Bueller at 8 p.m. tonight, right? Mm-hmm. But we know that, that particular piece of content they just watched, for example, another movie that would correlate to that. Then we could start to maybe pre-migrate that if we had, resources to do that. Right, so
or had access to what content was being recommended ahead of time.
Exactly. Like it's easy to push things out when you know that everybody's going to be watching, the latest new TV show. That's easy to do. It's the stuff where you start to fall into the lower tier requested things. You want to be able to make decisions based on what are people currently watching, what are the particular users in this area's preferences be. If we have that data, if we had the ability to see that data, then we can.
Like binging, for example, if someone is watching episode 1, you can
know,
start caching episode
exactly.
2.
I know I've got to get episode 2 into LGA or JFK.
But of course, the user's expectation doesn't change if they're like, oh, of course, I'm watching a very popular asset, so I'm getting the best experience versus I'm watching a long tail asset. I guess
Exactly.
I'm comfortable waiting, additional seconds. No, they expect the same,
Exactly.
High quality, fast performing experience for any asset they watch.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'd actually say too, I think one of the even bigger challenges, which doesn't involve anyone on this room, is with the advertising, at the end of the day, an ad asset it's an asset.
Right.
And if, like NBC is doing a lot of real-time bidding, and we don't necessarily know what ad asset's gonna come up from where. It could be some ad, some basement, Timbuktu, for all we know, and that's what could cause, a big black screen to come across the screen.
Right. Or, I mean, a low bandwidth situation, let's say you're on a mobile device and you're on the go. I mean, I'm sure all of us have had this experience trying to watch video on your mobile device, and you're sitting there waiting for an ad, and then finally the ad loads, and then maybe the ad completes, and then you're waiting for the content, and maybe the content doesn't load, and you're frustrated. One, are we targeting to, interesting ads to you, or the ads that are most relevant to you? But two, are they, yes, we can adapt the bit rate to your low bit rate situation, low bandwidth situation, but maybe we should be delivering a 6-second ad versus a 30-second ad. I don't think that in the industry we see enough sort of relevant ad experiences, not just relevant content, but relevant to your context.
Right.
Of like what level of ad tolerance do you have right now?
That's really interesting. Well, listen, we have about 10 minutes left. I wanted to open the floor up for any questions anyone might have about this. Yeah, go ahead.
So, this really is for you, Rob, but in terms of privacy and using users' data, how would you get around, are there ways that you can remain compliant with not abusing people's data in those circumstances where you're trying to talk to 3 other service providers about what's going on and how you can improve it?
Yeah, so
Sorry, to repeat the question, I think the question is, considering data privacy concerns, how are we able to share and communicate data between, your partners?
Yeah. So I think, and we were kind of discussing this prior to the call, but I think what we were kind of getting to or standardizing on was, I don't need to know the name of the person. I just need to know what the unique session ID was. So if Josh sees a rebuffer and he knows that this particular user is in a high-level DMA or a particular region, he can pass back simply the session ID and say, well, what does this session ID look like? And how was that delivered from origin through the CDN to that user? Oh, and by the way, I know you keep track of things like RTT and retransmitted bytes and various TCP level stats. What did those look like as well? So I think we can address those by not incorporating personal information at all in the actual transfer of this data. I simply want to have a standard tie data point that I can utilize to say, his data point that he collected on his side is this stream that I collected on my side, and I can join those together without having to do a lot of munging and guessing of data. I personally don't care about who the end user is.
You get paid either way.
Yeah, I mean, I just care about what session are we talking about, and then how does that correlate to the session that I delivered. And although it does feed into the something like a predictive pre-cache type of situation.
But yeah, it's a problem, especially when you said, when you want to share this data with other partners. That's where it gets complicated, because we might store some data about the user to do better recommendations and stuff like that. But once we start sharing it with others, we need to be very careful on how we do it. And of course, it needs to be anonymized. And the best way to do it is to really pass it specifically when the session is in place. So Limelight doesn't end up storing the same data as we do.
Correct.
They just get what they need at the time that they need it.
Yeah, we have specific GDPR issues with our logs where we purge those things from. We don't actually log certain fields in regions where that stuff is, where those laws are enforced. Although I'm not a lawyer, I don't really know exactly how that's done.
Any other questions? Missing any hands? Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.